Chapter 1: The Map and the Territory, Borges and the Limits of Science. In his short story on exactitude in science, the great Argentine writer Jorge Luis Borges tells the tale of a kingdom where the art of cartography reached such levels of precision that the king demanded a map of the empire that was so detailed, so accurate, that it would match the territory exactly, 1 inch of map for every inch of land. The cartographers, devoted to their craft, complied. The map grew larger, stretching over towns and rivers, until one day it completely covered the entire kingdom. Soon, people no longer knew where the map ended and the real world began. Eventually, the map was abandoned, left to decay in the sun, while the people returned to the imperfect but livable reality beneath it. It's a short and elegant parable, but the implications are enormous. Science, too, is in the business of mapping reality. Every new equation, every new model, every scientific theory is an attempt to chart the unknown, to reduce the infinite complexity of the world into something understandable. But here's the problem: no map, no model, no equation can ever truly be the world itself. The map is not the territory, and yet we often confuse the two. Philosophy exists precisely to remind us of this difference. From its very inception, philosophy was not some detached theoretical construct, but the very act of self-reflection by which humanity sought to bring itself to self-conscious clarity. It was through this original drive toward absolute self-understanding that the sciences themselves were born, emerging from the primordial ground of a rationality that sought not merely facts, but the deeper meaning of the world as a horizon of experience. But here's the problem: science, technology, and empirical inquiry have grown so dominant that philosophy, the very thing that once gave them their foundation, is now seen as unnecessary. We live in a world that prides itself on rationality, yet it increasingly ignores the discipline that first questioned what rationality even means. This is the crisis in which philosophy now finds itself. No longer the self-consciousness of science, no longer the guiding force of reason interrogating its own limits, but increasingly viewed as an antiquated discipline displaced by technical rationality. Today, philosophy is often dismissed as impractical, too abstract, too speculative, too detached from the empirical certainties of modern life. But is this really fair, or is this just another example of civilization developing an unconscious habit of ghosting the very thing that made it self-aware in the first place? Chapter 2: Why Philosophy Remains an Enigma. Since its earliest formal expressions, philosophy has struggled to define its own borders in the way that art and literature have. Its unique object and method have always left room for misinterpretation, often being mistaken for the very mythological or allegorical discourse it originally sought to transcend. Despite its deep ties to reason, philosophy has never fully escaped associations with mysticism and esotericism. This flexibility, however, is not a flaw. It's part of philosophy's very nature, allowing it to be adopted by various intellectual traditions. But such openness also makes philosophy seem less rigorous compared to the precision of modern scientific discourse. After all, why bother with precision when philosophy offers the delightful vagueness that so many intellectuals seem to enjoy? Yet, in an age of scientific rigor and data-driven analysis, this apparent looseness makes philosophy look, well, like the intellectual equivalent of collecting rare stamps, charming but not exactly serious business. And still, philosophy persists, because, as we all know, its true beauty lies not in what we already know, but in the vast, uncharted territories of thought that we love to explore. Last chapter: the inevitable encounter between science and philosophy. There is a moment, unavoidable, disorienting, when science, in its relentless pursuit of mastery, encounters a question that resists resolution. A question that does not submit to measurement, does not yield to technical precision. It is the moment in which science, without intending to, steps beyond itself and finds itself face to face with philosophy. This encounter is not willed. It is not part of a research agenda or a controlled experiment. It is an interruption, a rupture in the self-assurance of scientific method. Scientists, absorbed in their empirical investigations, do not seek philosophy. They are summoned to it, drawn into its domain by the very force of their own inquiries. How is knowledge possible? What constitutes truth? What lies beyond the limits of our models? These are not merely technical problems. They are the very questions upon which science itself is built. And yet, how often is this encounter met with resistance? How often do our thinkers, conditioned by the rigor of their disciplines, recoil at the realization that they stand on philosophical ground? The heirs of positivism, those diligent engineers of rationality, speak in equations, in data, in models. And yet, when they turn to the conditions of meaning that sustain their disciplines, they cannot help but stumble into a discourse older than their methods, older than the very concept of method itself. It is here, in this moment of estrangement, that irony emerges, for the scientist who steps back to interrogate the horizon of their knowledge discovers that this ground has already been inhabited by a thought that does not seek to dominate but to question, a thought that does not calculate but responds, a thought that has always been there, waiting to be recognized. The irony is not that science and philosophy remain in tension, it is that science, in its very effort to move forward, cannot help but return to the very thing it has long sought to leave behind. And so we arrive at the inevitable realization: the boundary between science and philosophy is not a wall, but a threshold, crossed time and again in the pursuit of understanding. Science moves forward, yet philosophy lingers beneath its steps, questioning, reframing, reminding. The deeper we probe into knowledge, the more we find ourselves returning to its very foundations. Perhaps this is not a cycle to escape, but a dialogue to embrace. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, because the search for truth is never truly finished.